crisis intervention officers inside of Hinds County, the Hinds County Sheriff Office. We have crisis intervention officers in the unincorporated and incorporated Hinds County. So I would make sure they also have lunacy hearings that goes on. I was reading an article in the Jackson Free Press involving Judge Green, and she was saying that they were having issues with the inmates just going. She wants them to be able to go through a mental evaluation. So when I get inside that building, I will make sure that they go through an extensive mental evaluation because as you know, crime increases with the heat. Crime increases with mental illness. Crime increases with depression, anxiety, and that all stems from what? Mental illness. So my mother, she suffered from a mental illness. I didn't know what was going on at the early age. I was All-American playing sports. I lived at school more than at home. My oldest sister, she acted more like my mom. But I knew my mom loved us. But at the same time, as I grew older and began to repair the relationship with my mom, I was able to understand that she was going through a mental illness. So I want people to not fear the unknown, but embrace it and understand that this is who these people are and understand where they're coming from. But also I want to be able to provide, the rehabilitation to them so that way they can be better productive citizens and also come out as being better productive citizens.
Oh, that is an excellent question. First of all, I'm my platform is to be the first sheriff to have a mental health department in my sheriff's department. I want the man and a woman, 2-man unit, 3-man unit, 2-women unit, it doesn't matter. I want them to be part of the sheriff's department. When calls go out, they should be responding from the sheriff's department going to those calls. Now, they would be the mental health aspect, but they would be with a deputy would be assigned with them. We want to elevate and analyze those situations as they come in. And what better way to do it is to have my own mental health department in the department, not just for our customers, clients, people that we're going to come in contact with, but for my officers, my men and women that work in that department. Not saying they need mental health, but let's say they go through something, they may need somebody to talk to. So having a mental health department within my sheriff's department that I can get up, go talk to, visit with, learn from, that is a big plus in my platform. And I think it would help. It would definitely help.
Yes, I am a CIT officer, a crisis intervention team officer at the Jackson Police Department. Mental health is serious. While in the jail, if we convert back to the direct supervision model, that means that a deputy at all times will be in a housing unit to recognize certain behaviors dealing with pretrial detainees. And one of those behaviors would be mental health. That deputy can recognize the sign of mental illness and fill out the proper paperwork to get that detainee the proper help that he or she needs. I will, as sheriff, make sure that everybody is properly trained in the mental health facility at the Hinds County Sheriff's Department.
Okay. As of right now, I don't know of any mental health programs that they have. The Jackson Comprehensive Health Center is willing to lend a hand anytime. A lot of these times, all you have to do is reach out and ask for help. Do the detainees need mental health? Of course they do. So do the employees of the department. I think they all need to be CRT trained, and that's a start right there.
I would have put on some. I need to put on some lipstick.
You're fine. You are absolutely fine.
Go ahead.
All right. Number 1, upgrades and repairs for the jail are going to take funds. What plans do you have to enhance the level of services without increasing the budget? What is your fiscal plan?
How would I upgrade the jail without
Increasing the budget.
increasing the budget?
What's your fiscal plan?
Well, of course, with any budget, you have to look at your line items, look where you can change money, move money around You may have programs that was previously funded on a line item. You can take from those various programs and you can apply that toward that. But also I would look for additional outside funding. Of course, I will have to work closely with the Board of Supervisors. I will have to work closely even with the legislatures. We will also look at grant funding, monies that that are out there. With this CARES Act, the amount of money that municipalities are getting as it relates to crime fighting, it is my belief that a lot of monies are out there. It's just a matter of getting my physical affairs people to look for those additional funds.
Question number 2, what extent would you ensure that contracting for some of the various services for the Sheriff's Department, like car fleets, uniforms, things that you would contract with businesses for, how would you ensure that a lot of that work would go to local and or Black businesses?
Well, and I'm glad you asked that. When I was with the FBI police, I had that duty of looking at purchasing cars, uniforms, and oftentimes they have a bid process. Depends on the amount of money, of course. So, of course, we cannot just tag minority business. We would like to encourage minority business to participate in the bid process with any contract. We want to be fair and equitable with that without violating the law. I did tell you I'm an FBI agent. Okay.
Question number 3, describe an instance where you made the wrong call as a law enforcement officer, and how did you rectify your error, and what did you learn from that error?
An instance where I made the wrong call. Well,
An instance where you feel like you made the wrong call or made the wrong call as a law enforcement officer, and how did you rectify it? What did you learn from it?
Well, I think it goes back to supervising police officers. When I was a police supervisor at JPD, there were certain officers that were having issues that hindsight I would have addressed differently as it relates to marital problems and things of that nature. But being a young supervisor, when I became a supervisor at JPD, they took us to a week-long class, supervisory class. Unfortunately, I did not have a senior officer to work a senior supervisor to work directly with me on many occasions. So there were different personnel issues that, and I won't go just explicitly, that I ran into. Hindsight, as my career evolved and I began to deal more with the officers, I determined that I could have handled it differently. And so what did I do to correct that? I went to other senior supervisors. I shared with them my experience and how I felt that I could have handled it differently. I find that when you do not know something, even as a supervisor, you must be willing to seek out the information and seek out the correct procedure. So how did I resolve it? I corrected my actions. I started looking at it from the totality of the situation. Oftentimes, we would, even as supervisors, we would become upset. We may split decisions, which may not always be the right decision. But I thank God for my ability to go back and readdress those with the specific officers.
Okay. Question number 4, how would you foster better interdepartmental relationships between the Sheriff's Department, the police departments, and even the Capitol Police?
You know, that's a good question. It's very important. Having worked in the FBI Law Enforcement Coordination Unit, I dealt with a lot of entities. And I found that in order for Hinds County Sheriff to be Department to be successful, our surrounding law enforcement agencies, they must too be successful. We all have to work together. I'm good at fostering relationships. I have the ability, God bless me with the ability to work outside the box. It's not like I just have to work with one agency. I can work with all of them. I realize that each one of these agencies brings something different to the table, just like individuals. How would I foster? I would probably set up additional meetings with them, especially upon taking office, let them know what my issues are, what my platform is, and see whether or not we can combine our resources, combine intelligence. Intelligence is very important. If something is happening within the city of Jackson or Hinds County, I want to make my law enforcement partners knowledgeable of that. They too may have something going on. It may be some kind of trend going on in the area, but if you do not communicate, you will not know that.
Question number 5, how will you broaden trust amongst the community so that people will call and report crimes, and even those people in other communities and of other races? What's your plan to instill more trust in the sheriff's department?
Not just in trust in the sheriff's department, trust in law enforcement. When we look at what has been happening over the last couple of years, it's been highlighted where people have a great distrust for law enforcement because of police-involved killings and things of that nature. When I look at that, I go back to my childhood, having grown up in Georgetown in a lower economic area where the only time that I would see the police was when it was something negative in an adversarial type environment. I think in order to overcome that, as leaders, law enforcement leaders, we have to take our people back to the basic community-oriented policing. When I say community-oriented policing, that's when the citizens knows the police and the police knows the citizens. But those relationships, they're established with young black boys and girls at a young age. They see Officer Friendly coming through. They're not afraid of the police. And also where the elderly, where they used to like sit on a porch and everything, a lot of them are afraid. They're afraid that if they call the police will what? Pull up to their house, shine the light, and people know that they're the one called. What I did when I was at Precinct 3, and I put a lot of emphasis on this, and I would tell my officers, if you get a call for service and someone calls the police for suspicious activity or people loitering or what have you, do not go to that individual's house unless they ask you to come to their house. That way, if the officer is in the area addressing the complaint, no one has to know if Miss Williams called them or Mr. John called them. They would just go and go through the area and observe the area. So we will also have to have different type of community events. I'm big on the law and youth with our young people. After all these police shootings, police-involved incident, I think it's incumbent that we bring our law enforcement and our young people, our community back together so we can discuss some of these issues. Why is it that if a policeman stops a young African American male, how should that young male react or interact with the police? How should the police interact with that young male? So those are a lot of things that we need to address. And I started the reading patrol when I was stationed here as an agent with the FBI. We went to the Boys and Girls Club on Capitol. And what we did, I personally went over to the Jackson Public School resource office, and I got a list of all the books that these young kids will be reading the next school year. And what we did, my organization, National Organization of Executive Black Executives, we purchased those school books that those kids would read. And we took those books back to the Y, and I had FBI, JPD, Hinds County Sheriff, U.S. Marshal. I had all these law enforcement entities, guys particular, and some women come in, and they would read those books with those kids. They would have discussions with those kids. Now, that was a twofold purpose. One is that the kids get to interact with a positive role model. Secondly, they get to interact with law enforcement officers not on an adversarial means. And thirdly, they get to know them within their community. That was a very good program. I was somewhat disheartened when I left Jackson that the FBI did not continue that program. But those are some programs that I feel would be very good in reaching our people. I like the fact of, for the rural areas, doing health and welfare check on our elderly that lives alone. These are all programs that we can foster within our community to show them that we care about our public that we serve, and it re-engages our community in a positive manner with law enforcement. Thank you.
Question number 6. The sheriff's office is an elected position, and thus it is a political position. How do you propose to keep politics out of law enforcement, even in the midst of a lot of the tumultuous scenes that we have seen coming out of a lot of the meetings? How do you propose to separate the two, even though you are a political officer?
Good question. I feel that this is my first time ever running for a public office. Never thought I would ever be a politician. And I feel that would be a very difficult situation to do. But I'm also I'm a 31-year law enforcement veteran. Okay? So my belief is that if you stay with what the law is and you do that which is right, I know it won't always be that easy. It sounds easy. I know it will be difficult. But you're talking to someone, like I said, I always believe that as a law enforcement officer, I have an oath to keep. And that should not transcend because I'm an elected official. I go into that gray area. I'm a firm believer. You do that which is right. You follow the law. Of course, there will be times that I will have to address issues such as that question. And I pray that I will continue to keep the mindset that I have kept for 31 years, is that as a sworn law enforcement officer, I have an obligation to do that which is right. So now, ask me once I'm elected, Beverly, you're here now, what are you going to do? And I'll come right back to it. Everything that I do involves prayer. Even when making decisions as a supervisor, and I have supervised both police officers, military officers, as well as FBI agents, and I know that politics plays a role, but these 31 years I've been fortunate because everybody knows me, know that that's me, that defines me as it relates to being honest, fair, and doing the right thing. That's it.
Question number 7. In the chain that is law enforcement, from arrest to bond, sentencing to rehabilitation, with Jackson's current crime issues, where do you see is the weak link in that chain, and how can the sheriff's office help?
Wow, that is a loaded question. And when I look at the totality of our criminal justice system, not just in Jackson, because see, unlike most of my competitors, I have police outside of Jackson, outside of Mississippi. So the complexity of policing, I think I have a broader sense of that because all my experiences are not just in one place. When I look at Jackson, I look at our criminal justice system, and I feel that there's a lot of work which needs to be done. I look at our detention center. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. I look at our inability to get cases prosecuted. I look at our inability to house misdemeanor offenses. I look at our inability to get the proper number of public defenders for individuals who are incarcerated. I look at our inability to get mental health evaluations, which are required for a large number of our defendants who are within our detention center. It's just like a bottle. And with the bottom being the biggest part of it, our system is bottleneck right at the top because there's so many components that makes up our entire system. So as the sheriff, it will be my responsibility to address so that, okay, I look at the detention center as being one of the biggest responsibility your sheriff will have. In order to move that process, everything else on the top has to move. The correctional, being prosecuting cases, be it getting mental health evaluation, being it getting counseling for the individuals, all that makes up our criminal justice system. So that means I will have to work within the system at each level of that. In those areas that I can impact as your sheriff, I will have to do that. Be it go talk with the judges as it relates to moving the cases along. Be it seek out additional assistance for mental health evaluation so that I know at the time, right now, probably 60%, and that may be a high number, of the individuals incarcerated, let's say 40, 50%, needs mental evaluation. If you have a system such as Hinds County where you're relying on the state mental health system to evaluate these people, and they only have 60 odd slots, and you have 200 people that needs evaluation, you're gonna have a bottleneck. It's not going to flow. So we would need to seek out additional funding so that we can probably, hire outside mental health counselors to do these assessments. Okay, then we're going to have to work closely with the prosecutor's office because we know that the DA's office prosecutes the case. Do they have enough prosecutors? And then let's not forget one of the most important part of this whole equation is our inability to get evidence processed through our crime lab. It's backed up 4 or 5 years. So when you talk about our criminal justice system as it relates to Hinds County, you have at least, I have named about 5 or 6 moving parts. Each one of those parts has to be working together. And as the sheriff of Hinds County, I will have to get involved with each phase of that in order to get the system to move. So to shorten this answer, okay, suppose we are able to get our mental evaluation, but we do not have the DAs to prosecute the case, or we cannot get on a court docket because they do not have public defenders. So when we talk about our criminal justice system, one needs to be knowledgeable that it's not just a detention center. It's made up of different components. Okay?
You spoke on this issue a little bit. Is there availability for mental health training and staff? And how would you propose to protect mentally ill citizens while they are in jail?
You said your first part of that question.
First part of the question is do you think there's availability for mental health training and staff at the Sheriff's Department? And how would you propose to protect mentally ill citizens that are in the jails currently while they are in jail?
Yes, and I spoke before. That's a large percentage of your population, which are confined. And that's one of the major problems with the system we have become a warehouse where we put mentally ill people in jail with criminal people. Mental illness should not be a crime, and it should not be treated as a crime. So what we would do, because of the long length of time people are confined within the detention center, I think it's incumbent, it's necessary that we have people mentally evaluated. And it's also important that our detention people, our officers, not just detention officers, but the officers on patrol, that they're trained in being able to recognize when people are having a some kind of mental breakdown or some kind of mental disorder. It's very important that they recognize that. And I would dare to say, and this is my opinion, that a lot of the police involved shooting, not a lot of them, but a large percentage, deal with people who are mentally ill. I think we have to have programs where the deputies are trained, and not only that, we have a relationship with the non-governmental agencies, such as your Region 8, such as your churches, such as your mental health officials that can work with us, that when one of the officers go out and they see that this person is having an experience, that they be able to call and refer this family. Keep in mind now, when a person has a mental health issue, it's not only affects that particular individual, it affects the entire family. It's a holistic problem. And that's the same way with the officers. Officers go out to the scene and this person is having a mental episode. If that officer is trained to identify that, he would know, well, I have to deal with this in a different manner. So I am very open to mental health evaluations. I am very open to when officers are having, and they too experience it. I look back when I was a young rookie cop going on scenes of horrific traffic accident where I'm having to pull a child's body out of a car and that child dies or someone dies at the scene. That in itself caused mental issues within the officer. So we have to have that time frame that the officers seek assistance, and we cannot continue. And I'm gonna be honest, as a race of people, and I'm talking from the Black race because I am a Black woman. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a grandmother. And I know that we tend to frown on it. It's more acceptable today than it was years ago. People are understanding that sometimes you have to get some help to deal with some issues. And there's nothing wrong with it. Okay? But so it's important that we begin to implore upon people we love, fellow officers, if you need help, man, there's nothing wrong with getting help. I think about, and I'll leave you with this. Right before I left the FBI police, I had one of my officers commit suicide. And that was devastating for me because I would pass by this officer, talk with him, and I thought everything was okay with it. But I later found out some of his friends who were also police officers knew that he was going through some changes and that he was contemplating doing something. But it bothered me because I'm like, at what point is it that my officers do not feel comfortable enough to come to me as their leader to tell me, hey, Ms. Williams, you may want to look at this. So it's a lot that goes into that. And when you talk about mental health, it's for real. There is a thin line between sanity and insanity. And we see it every day in our society. Unless we start addressing these issues and understand it's nothing to be embarrassed about, it's a part of life, we will continue to have what we have.
Okay.
Well, I would actually help interact with the Hinds Behavior Health because they work along with our officers out there on the street. And our officers out there they're called the CIT team, which is the Crisis Intervention team. And I do plan to interact with the Hinds Behavior Health along with the person's family, if possible, to try to see what we can do to help the person's actually the mental, what we can do to help them live better or be better in society.
Well, number one, you got to look at the consent decree. The consent decree, United States versus Hinds County. There are requirements that we provide treatment for the mentally ill. Now, is Hinds County meeting that obligation? No. That's why the Department of Justice is on us so very hard at this time, because we have what they call it's not a strategic plan, but it's a stipulated order that comes from the Department of Justice that says you must do this. Hinds County has been mandated that you must have a psychologist. That's the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors. And again, the responsibility of the sheriff is to provide a safe haven for the individuals that's in custody. So we got to work with the Board of Supervisors in order to create a safe place, not only for the detainees, but for the people that's employed there.
Well, one of the things that's a real sticky question right there when you're dealing with the mentally ill, because one of the things, and I'll kind of go in a couple of different directions in responding to this. When you're dealing with law enforcement, where you're responding to calls on the street, it's an unknown to you what call you're going to, unless it's an AMR call, meaning AMR call and say that they need JPD to stand by because they have a call of a 1092. 1092 means that there is somebody who could possibly be mentally ill, mentally disturbed, may be elusive or high on drugs, and they need officers to stand by. Well, without that firsthand knowledge in responding to a call, you don't know if somebody has Tourette's, that is bipolar, schizophrenic. So when you're going to a call, you're going to respond to do your job. Unfortunately, not knowing, and then you end up dealing with somebody mentally ill and doing your job, you have not serviced that mentally ill person in the manner that you should. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to have some certified officers who are really trained in the mental field. They have CIT officers, but you want to go a little bit further in depth in the training than just a CIT officer, because even with the CIT officer, they're calling more mental health professionals on scene to deal with it, whether they're going to Meredith Health, they're going out to Whitfield and the other locations that you go for people who need to be not necessarily incarcerated, but be kept in house until that situation has calmed itself and they can be put back into mainstream.
Well, I used to work on with the Warrants Division of Hinds County. We were the ones that handled the mentally patients that were being transported to Whitfield, to St. Dominic's Hospital, or any other facilities that did mental evaluations. So, and I got several letters from some of the mental institutions about how I treated the mental patients with respect and not abuse, and trying to understand that they're not responsible for their actions. There needs to be a certain degree of training, or at least a unit available when you're dealing with a mental patient to be able to recognize the difference. Sometimes, folks just don't recognize the difference. They think they're just being disorderly or mean, but sometimes it's literally mental issues that are creating a problem. So, officers need to know who and what they're dealing with, And this only comes through training.
Okay. You have the avenue to get volunteers, nurses, different medical field that can train officers how to identify bipolar, depressions, and all kind of mental disease. That we can be informed and taught how to recognize who is intoxicated and who's bipolar on depression, on medication. So we can be taught by volunteers in the public again, getting involved. But our thing is to make sure we protect our citizen. They are our citizen also. This is our job to know. Our life is on the line. And so with all different officers and different training, different of the medical facility, we can have people that are willing to volunteer, to show, to be able to come to some resolution to how we can dissolve this and start separating within the Hinds County Penal Forum or even in the RDC or in the jail facility. You can separate to find out who has these kind of problems.
There are training, they all have training courses. You have in-person training courses and you have more online training courses offered to officers. That's due to the coronavirus that makes it more online training. Right now I'm in a course now on mental illness that I'm taking online. I'm taking a course also on special needs. Those courses are what opening my eyes up on a lot of more stuff that I thought I knew, but now I see more how to deal with it. The jail with mental illness people, the jail is set up for so many people, and it's a special where they're isolated from the general public and it's set up where they can't hurt themselves. And we'll work with the hospitals if they really need, and we're not equipped for them to be able to hold them in a safer environment.
There's a staff do have mental health training. Mental health training should be a top priority by any sheriff or any law enforcement head. And the reason I say that is because, of course, not all law enforcement officers are trained to deal with the mentally ill, but we do receive training on how to respond to the mentally ill. But if you have someone within your agency that's readily available that you can call on as it relates to the mental ill in your facilities, then that is an asset because you have someone there and readily available to deal with them. Now, as it relates to law enforcement officers, we have several officers that are trained in what we would consider to be crisis intervention. These individuals know how to address people that may be possibly suffering from mental illness when they may respond to a call for service or someone they may encounter during their tour of duty. But you have to keep training. There's never enough training for mentally ill. You have to have the open line of communication again with your agency and the outsourced agency that provides the training as well. That way you will know that the people that are within your agency are up to speed, they're up to date as it relates to whatever type of training there is that may be readily available for mental health or mental illness training as well. So should be a recurring factor within your training schedule. I'm not sure if it's maybe every quarter, twice a year or whatever, but whatever is recommended, it should always be available for your staff.
As the current sheriff, I'm already working on that plan. That is a 21st century crime fighting plan. What that does is we're not even interested in anything talking about defunding the police. We need to be talking about reallocation of resources. So the budget that we have right now, we need to look at contractual opportunities where we bring in experts to deal with some of these issues that law enforcement officers for far too long have been asked to address, like mental health issues. Law enforcement officers are not mental health providers, but we do have partners in the mental health field that we should employ, bring them in and put them on staff to be able to deal with mental health crises. We also need to train our officers what to look for on mental crisis and mental episodes so they know how to address that on the front end. we also need to look at the healthcare industry as a whole and bring other assets in to join our ranks. And that's what we're doing right now. I'm making contact with mental health providers in and around the Jackson metropolitan area, and also social services providers in and around Jackson. We need social workers and counselors added to our team. So when I say reallocation of resources, we need to bring in additional resources, both financial and human resources, to ensure that we're dealing holistically with the crime problem that's going on in our urban environment.